In this video, we're going to be taking a look at creating a very simple REST API using the Oak framework in Deno. And to get started, I've went ahead and created a file called oak.ts here, in which I'll be writing all the code. First of all, we're going to need an application and a router, which we can import from the Oak URL. To do that, we're going to use the import statement, and we're going to be importing an application and a router. And we will be getting those from https deno.land/oak/mod.ts. And you can find this URL in the documentation. I'll post it down below. So now that we have imported our application and router, first of all, we're going to need to instantiate the router. So we'll go ahead and do new router. Now let's actually define all the different routes that our server will have. So in order to do that, we have to do router.get, and for the first route, we will just do the simple root endpoint, which will return us all of the different books. So this REST API will display books. We're gonna get books by a specific ID and list all the different books we have and things like that. So the root endpoint will be taking an anonymous function that will execute once the user visits that. This anonymous function takes a context, and we return back a response body of hello world. So let's actually go ahead and try that. In order to try that, we first need to also instantiate our application. So for that, we're going to need to create a new variable called app, which will be an instance of application. And after we have defined all of our routes, we're going to be saying app.use router.routes. So what this will do is it will pretty much take all of the routes we have defined in our router variable and give that to our application, which is an instance of application, and that is pretty much the server. The other thing we're going to need is app.use, and then we're going to do router.allow methods, and this is to allow us to use the different methods such as get, post, etc. Lastly, we're going to need to start the server and give it a port. So for that we will need to do app.listen, and then we're going to give it a port of 3000. And you see here we have to give it an await, since this is a continuous process that has to always run and await for new requests to come in. So we use the unique feature in Deno, which is a top level await without any async to enclose that in. So this is pretty much ready for us to test out. Let's open up the terminal and then do deno run allow net flag, and then the name of the file is oak.ts, and it compiled, and it looks like we have misspelling. This should be allowed methods. So let's go ahead and recompile that, and it looks like we have started. So if I come over here and I go to localhost 3000, we get hello world, so it's working. So the next thing we should start implementing is a /book endpoint, which gives us all of the books we have. So in order to do that, before we create the router for it, first of all, we need to create basically a map of the different books we're going to store. So for that, we're going to create a variable called books. This will equal to a map that will have string and then contain any for the value part. So if you're not familiar, maps are key value pairs. So we have to define what the key type will be and what the value type will be. Any pretty much tells the TypeScript compiler that it can be of any type. It could be a number, a string, an object, anything. And here we have restricted the type of the key to only be strings. So let's go ahead and set a new book on our map. For that, we will have the first one be called 1, and the value for that will be an object. The object will contain an ID of 1, and title of, this should not be enclosed in strings. This should be a property, so we don't need to close it in a string. Title will be just a book title, and then the author be Andrew. So now that we have added our book, let's go ahead and create our router endpoint to return all these books. So let's go ahead and define our endpoint here. This will be /book, and similar to the one above, the anonymous function that will execute will take context, and then the context response body will equal to array from books.values, and this will pretty much return all of the different books. So in order to test that out, let's go ahead and rerun our application. And if we go and do /book, we get the output already formatted into JSON. So as you can see, we have wrote very little code. We pretty much just told it to return the books map and put that into an array. So what the array from function does is it created an array on the fly based on all of the values that are stored within books. So it took the only value we have here, which contains the object of ID, title, author, and it created an array out of that. And then here it returned an array of objects, which in this case it's only a single object, and that object contains all of the different values that we added. As you can see, I have an extension for JSON output, so that's why it's nicely formatted and I can do things like that. But you can see it's very little code compared to if we were writing this in Express, using Express on Node's side, for example. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's one of the features in Node that in Deno, that really stands out. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new endpoint which will return us a book by its ID. So we're gonna use some dynamic params or parameters. So this new endpoint will be /book/ID, and if you have worked with Express at all, in order to declare any dynamic parameters, we do the colon and then the name of the parameter we expect to get. So in this case, it's ID. And similarly to the other functions, it's going to take context. And we will do a little bit of checking to make sure that we have the parameters first. So first of all, we're going to do context.params. Make sure we have that. We're going to also check if we have context.params.id. And we're going to also check if our books map has context.params.id. So this if statement is a little bit long, but basically we won't execute any code unless we make sure that we have params, whether it's one or more, and then we have the ID parameter set, and then our books map has a book of the ID parameter that we got. And if this passes, and by the way, the and basically makes sure that each one of these statements has to equal to true, or all of them has to equal to false in order to execute this piece of code enclosed within these semicolons. Actually, if all of them are false, it's not going to execute. All of them have to be true. So if this passes, we're going to return a response body of books.get context.params.id. And in order to test this out and make it more interesting, I'm going to add another book here. We're going to call this one 2. Title will have a new book, and author will be equal to Peter. So let me restart my server and let's go ahead and check out what we have here. So I'm gonna first just list out all the books. So we're gonna check out the /book endpoint and we get the 2 books. Now let's say I want a book that has the ID of 2, and boom, I do /2 and the application returns that single object with the ID 2, title, and I can do the same thing for 1. So as soon as I supply it a parameter that the books map contains that value, we do get it returned. Now let's say I do 3, we get nothing because 3 doesn't exist. And this is the if statement that we added to make sure that we don't serve anything unless we actually have it. So that's pretty much it. I hope this was helpful and kind of gave you an idea about how the Oak framework works. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comments below and I'll make sure to answer. That'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching.